Now welcome to another edition of Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll for Darth Nihilus from Knights of the Old Republic 2. We'll then see how those results compare to all the other characters we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some of your comments. But before any and all that, you know what to do by now. You can head down to nominate and or vote for which character we do next by responding to my pinned comment with a character name or voting with a thumbs up if the one you'd like to see is already listed. Whatever single comment gets the most votes in the next 24 hours or so will be the winner and the character we do next. Alright, and now on to the results for Darth Nihilus, where we'll see that 30% of voters gave him an A, 51% then thought he was a B tier character, 14% went with a C, which left 2% to give him a D, and a final 3% to give him an F. And so when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, that means Nihilus ends up with an average score of 4.03, which actually puts him into a tie for 28th place with none other than Darth Traya, as well as Jango Fett. But when we go to our tiebreaker, which is percentage of A votes, that means he finishes behind Traya and just ahead of Jango and takes 29th place overall. And before getting to your comments on this one, just let me once again say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these or any of my videos. It is all greatly appreciated. Also, a big thank you to everyone who supports this channel and what I try to do here over on Patreon. And so now let's kick this off, as we always do, with the top rated comment, which this time came to us from Casual Arc Trooper, who said, "In my opinion, he is one of the most terrifying characters in Star Wars, the one who always hungers and capable of draining planets of life. However, he isn't a very developed character. Regardless, I still find him to be among my favorite of the Sith Lords." Okay, so like I said when we did Traya a couple months back now, I've only played the second Knights of the Old Republic game one time, and that was when it first came out like 20 years ago at this point. Unlike the first game, or first KOTOR game, which I've played multiple times over the years and know very well. Basically what I'm saying is that game and the story of Nihilus is not as fresh in my mind as I would like it to be, especially when making a video on a topic. I usually like to have a pretty good understanding of a topic to make a video. So basically I will be reading comments, and I don't know how much I will respond in this video. Maybe it'll be a lot, maybe it'll be a little. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess. Anyway, to touch on Casual Arc Trooper's comment just a bit here, as well as this one from Blake Davison, which is very similar, I do agree he is absolutely one of the most terrifying characters in Star Wars, maybe the most when you consider his look, his weird voice, and certainly what he's capable of, that he can essentially drain entire planets of life, which is pretty insane power to have, right? Maybe too insane, you could argue. I mean, it's one of those things that if you saw it in a movie, especially compared to the original trilogy, where when you really stop and think about it, there isn't anything all that crazy done with the Force in those films. It's more something that can be used to augment everyday things like running, jumping, and so on, as well as, of course, Force pushing and pulling, some Jedi mind tricks and that sort of thing. And lightning being tossed around by Palpatine is easily the most potent or impressive kind of ability we see in those first three films. And that basically holds true for the prequels as well. There's nothing too crazy in there either in terms of power level. We just see the Force used more frequently than we did in the original trilogy. But then, of course, in the sequels, we're seeing things handed through and across time and space. We have Force projection, we have Palpatine using lightning to hit an entire fleet of ships, and so on. But even all that isn't quite on par with draining an entire planet of life. Which isn't to say I hate the game or the character or find it too ridiculous for Star Wars or anything like that. There is a lot of ridiculous things in Star Wars, but I don't put this in that category necessarily. I mean, he did attain the power through a very unique circumstance, right? He did become a wound in the Force, which means this is a rare thing and not something every Sith Lord can just achieve or become. Not that they'd even want to, considering it is kind of balanced, you could say, against there being a terrible price to pay. He always hungers, and the more he eats, the hungrier he basically gets. There's really no way to ever truly satiate his appetite, and eventually his body is consumed by the dark side itself, and his spirit is then placed within his mask and armor and all of that, which does all make sense or fits for the Sith very well, I think. That there's always a heavy price to pay when you use the dark side and achieve any sort of power, which is one of the main ideas or thoughts behind Star Wars, that the more selfish you are, the more you do for yourself or try to gain, the more you actually fear and lose and end up suffering in the end. Alright, that then brings us to this comment from Lazzle Dazzle, who said, "This is the perfect way to have immortal Sith characters, because in the end, with Sion and Nihilus, living that way is not worth it." And I absolutely agree. I've been talking a lot lately in videos about Force ghosts and immortality, and how the one thing the Sith want above all else, to live forever basically, is the one thing they can never ever achieve. That they'd have to go the exact opposite route. They'd have to become the epitome of a Jedi, or one with the light side of the Force, in order to live forever, or in a sense live forever at least. Because being a Force ghost isn't immortality the way I think the Sith would want it to be, where they would get to live in the physical world alive and well as part of the living Force forever, and probably ruling the galaxy and doing all that other fun stuff. But I do find it fitting that they can live, well, maybe not forever exactly, but that they can achieve this kind of twisted and perverse form of immortality that ends up being more of a curse or a mockery of life itself, if you will. And it ends up being this existence of just endless suffering, which again ties into what George Lucas has always said about the dark side, that it's ultimately the path to suffering. You can't win that way. You can't win by being selfish. You can't ever be content with life when you just want more and more. And Nihilus is the perfect example of that. Alright, and moving on now, we have this comment from Veterlit Torf, who said, "I'll give him an A. Darth Nihilus is the perfect example of what going all the way with the dark side means, and every single dark side user would eventually end up like him if they sought to immerse themselves constantly further in the dark side. With just a word, he completely drained the life force and force energy of Qatar, including all landmass, oceans, vegetation, all living things died. It caused a freak weather storm, a very big earthquake, and sent echoes throughout the Force. His power was felt by Force sensitives across the entire galaxy, and telekinetically tore a fleet of Star Destroyer-sized ships from the extreme gravity vortex generated by the mass shadow generator from Malachor, then proceeded to hold the ship together throughout the galaxy. With his great power, Nihilus was seemingly unstoppable. However, his great power is completely illusory. His power controls him, not the other way around. Come the events of KOTOR 2, he's more akin to a force of nature than a conscious entity, somewhat similar to how Galactus in Marvel Comics is a slave to his hunger. He has achieved the ultimate power he surely craved for, but it leaves him unable to pursue anything else. He's essentially enslaved by it. His fate also showcases the merit of the Jedi dogma of letting go of attachments. Nihilus is attached to his power, and it has enslaved him utterly. He started on the path because he did not want to die on Malachor. He sought to free himself of death. But in his single-mindedness, he actually sacrificed all his freedom and became a slave to power. The true freedom lies in letting go of attachments and not allowing them to control you. This is the conundrum of the dark side. Power for the sake of power is no power at all. Palpatine is a very similar character in the sense that he pursues power for the sake of it, cackling all the way, but his slavery is never represented. He's presented as the genius manipulator who's almost always in control, but the trade-off, the other side of the coin, is never shown. This is what makes Nihilus one of the greatest villains of Star Wars mythology, due to the immense allegorical weight he carries. Very, very, very well said all around, and I couldn't agree more. Power for the sake of power is an empty pursuit. That's kind of one of the core philosophies or ideas behind Star Wars. It becomes a prison of your own making when you're just afraid to lose everything you've amassed. It consumes you to the point where you don't even get to enjoy this power or everything you have because you're so worried about losing it or trying to gain more and who's going to take it from you. Which is represented well with, again, the story of Darth Nihilus, and far less so when it comes to Palpatine. Though, in all fairness, Episode 9 does begin to delve into the awful price Palpatine is willing to pay to try and come back from the dead and or live forever. Though if they'd actually planned his return from the very start of the trilogy, it probably could have been handled pretty well. It could have shown the, I don't want to say dark side of Palpatine, but the downside of everything he tried to accomplish in the first two trilogies, that there was a price to be paid by him other than, of course, dying and losing. But anyway, let's start to wrap this one up with a few final comments, and like I said before, I will do more videos on these characters and this game after I have replayed it. But for now, a few final comments, starting with this one from Pawar LOS, who said, "The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force. Vader wasn't kidding when he said this." Moving on then, we also have this comment from Orcust, who said, "He's a solid B for me. As a representation of how twisted and unnatural the dark side is, he's great, essentially being the Star Wars equivalent of Galactus if he came about from a mass extinction event. However, in the grand scheme of things, he's barely a character, which is the point of the guy, I know, and his role in the story equates to being a big monster. Add to that how we don't even get much insight into what little character he did had due to not being able to understand him, and he's a solid B. Great representation of the dark side, but weak from a character perspective. Also then we have this comment from O who said, he cares nothing for the Sith or its teachings or the Jedi, and when the Jedi are all dead, he will feed on the galaxy, the Republic, and eventually the Sith. And this is, of course, a quote from Kreia. Next up, then, we have this comment from Lord Nihilus himself, who said, my favorite character, as you could tell by my PFP, because of his so much different approach than other Sith. All the Sith nowadays just brag about how cool they are and that you can't stop them. Darth Nihilus' approach is different. His mere presence kills all around him. Instead of an arrogant man bragging about how cool he is, Darth Nihilus just hunts you down in the game, and just knowing that he's that powerful scares me. I also like how they bring up that he's so powerful and yet he is a dying beast. Also, the fact that you don't know who's behind the mask just makes him so much more interesting because you yourself can make up his backstory. Furthermore, his design is beautiful, his voice is scary, and his unclear backstory makes him so mysterious. Overall, an A+ for me. Moving on then, we have this comment from Austin Shaw who said, I like his concept, but I feel he is little more than a living MacGuffin. He is there to move the plot forward. Our next comment here then comes to us from Hadoken Fighter who said, I love how he looks and the overall theme of his character. He fulfills his role mostly well. It just kind of blows that he lacks screen time or even speaking in an understood language. So he doesn't get quite as super cool as Kreia and Scion. It also doesn't help that the exile is the perfect counter to him, and the gameplay reflects this quite well. Nevertheless, I'll give him a C since while he achieves what his character sets out to do, he's also the least interesting villain in the game, but to his credit, that's a very high bar to clear. He'd get a B if he got more characterization or screen time. Then we have this one from Tim Claridge who said, B, possibly the most terrifying villain the franchise has ever had. Even if his character development wasn't great, his presence alone and what he was capable of were enough. He is the darkness in which all life dies. All life exists to feed his power. And finally here, this comment from Wes Bradley Taubner, who said, doesn't have a lot of character development, but honestly, he isn't meant to be some deep character with a great story arc, like Vader or Revan, for instance. He's meant to be a force of nature who decimates everything in his path, whether it be puny Jedi Knights or entire planets. And he serves his role perfectly as one of the most interesting and badass characters in the Legends continuity. Plus, what makes me give him an A- instead of a B+, in my opinion, is just how horrifying he is. This is the only Star Wars character to give me horrible nightmares when I was a kid because of his mask, his voice, which sounds a lot like the thing from an 80s horror movie, and the fact that he drained billions or even trillions of beings through the Force, which is one of the worst fates you can have in Star Wars, almost as bad as being forced to watch The Last Jedi again. He is already dead, it is simply a question of how many he kills before he falls. This line pretty much sums up the character perfectly. He's not some Sith Lord who wants to conquer the galaxy or defeat the Jedi to get revenge. He's just a force of darkness who destroys everything and everyone. A- for me. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of Darth Nihilus, or tell me what you think of what I or anyone else had to say about him here in this video. Or you can, of course, nominate and or vote for which character we do next. Either way, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.